Joe Biden and Senator Kamala Harris will receive their first coronavirus briefing together. The presumptive Democratic nominee and his vice presidential pick will also deliver remarks following their pandemic meeting. This comes after slamming President Trump's response to the crisis during their first public appearance yesterday. However, Biden also focused on his historic decision to choose Senator Harris as his VP nominee.
And this morning, all across the nation, little girls woke up, especially little black and brown girls, who so often feel overlooked and undervalued in their communities. But today, just maybe, they're seeing themselves for the first time in a new way as the stuff of president and vice presidents.
Both Biden and Harris ramped up their attacks on President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. They blasted the Trump administration's pandemic response and vowed to lead the country out of chaos.
We're reeling from the worst public health crisis in a century. The president's mismanagement of the pandemic has plunged us into the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. America is crying out for leadership. Yet we have a president who cares more about himself than the people who elected him.
All right, so we're going to take a closer look at the Biden-Harris campaign, what we can expect from the presumptive Democratic nominee and his running mate. We want to bring in Ed O'Keefe. So Ed, this is the first time, yesterday was the first time that we saw both of them together and got a little inkling as to the message they would be delivering and sort of the tone that they would be taking. What was your biggest takeaway?
These two know how to do it. Look, it was awkward. This is a high school gymnasium near Biden's home in Wilmington, Delaware. They've used it before for other events where he needed to give a speech or talk to reporters. But normally this kind of event would have been held in a basketball or football stadium. You know, there would have been thousands of people there cheering. They would have been feeding off the crowd. Instead, there were probably 30 people tops in the room, reporters, cameramen, Secret Service agents, and just a handful of their staffers, and then their spouses at the end. What I found interesting is that there were actually a number of senior campaign staffers who probably haven't even seen the former vice president in months, who showed up yesterday to greet the senator, to talk to the two of them about what's ahead, and to be part of the fundraising that they were doing last night into the rest of this week. So a bit of a reunion at the same time as a relaunch with his new running mate. But look, as you said, the message they delivered is very clear. They're trying to defeat President Trump, and here's why they think they should do so. And Harris, who, you know, for lack of a better term, and there's no disrespect at all, it's factual. She's smooth, and she knows how to deliver an argument. She's a former prosecutor, and was essentially beginning to prosecute the case. And that's exactly what a vice presidential nominee does, is they more aggressively attack the other ticket and explain why their side's the better argument. And she launched into that right away.
Yeah, it sort of occurred to me that obviously Biden is well practiced at that too, and they both sort of have a tendency to, or at least have the ability to attack when it's warranted, which I thought is going to make for a very interesting last few months before the election. So listen, we just mentioned that both of them are going to be getting their first coronavirus briefing together. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, they haven't told us who exactly is conducting this briefing, but we do know that Biden has been getting briefings on the pandemic at least 3 days a week. He had said earlier on in this, global struggle that he was getting briefings 5 days a week. More recently, he said it was 3 days a week. Today, they're meeting with public health experts to talk about it in Wilmington. He's assembled, forgive me, he's assembled a team of aides who have worked on public health issues before, former surgeon generals, former officials at the Department of Health and Human Services who worked with him in the Obama administration, plus some others. So it may be them, it may be others who get piped in virtually or a meeting with them in person. And then they will, again, address this issue and their concerns about the Trump administration's handling of it. Look, as it is with everyone else, what they're focused on right now or what they're doing is completely affected by the pandemic. And they understand from a crass political standpoint that the more they talk about that, the more they remind people that they're aware of the economic downturn, the health risk, the fact that Americans aren't able to get together with family and friends or do their jobs or still have a job, that's one of the driving forces why people are supporting them.
Yeah, you definitely heard that in Kamala Harris's speech. And when we pivot to the economic recovery, you know, Kamala Harris has had maybe perhaps a more aggressive approach. She helped to put forward a bill that would give Americans a $2,000 check, more liberal economic proposals to bring the economy back into a healthy position, more liberal than Biden. Are they working to sort of find that middle ground?
Yeah, that's something we're going to have to learn about more in the next few days. And our producers are wise to point out that there is some disparity there, not only on economic issues, but on issues like marijuana policy. There were disagreements, at least initially, on health care, although she ended up coming closer to his position as she tried to triangulate in that long-running feud among Democrats about whether you keep to the Affordable Care Act, expand it, or switch to Medicare for all. She was more of a centrist on that and sort of more leaning towards status quo, as Biden does. That's the kind of stuff that's going to get picked apart in the coming days. That is something that they anticipate, that's something their teams anticipate, and that they'll talk about. But you're right, in this case, the one you mentioned, the idea that Americans would get a check every month of about $2,000, again, depending on their income, that's not something Biden's proposed. And so it'll be interesting to see if she drops her support of that or whether Biden embraces it. Remember, he has actually tilted slightly more to the left on a few of these economic matters, especially given the enormity of the challenge in trying to put the American economy back together, adopting a lot of the positions that Elizabeth Warren and to some extent Bernie Sanders had, adopting some of the criminal justice proposals from liberals like Julian Castro. So he gets it, but his team understands that they can do that now at a time and in a space where there's a cry for some real bold thinking on these things, even if it is something that is more liberal than Biden would have typically supported in the past.
And some would argue not just to bring pull the country back together, but perhaps the Democratic Party too. He's been working really hard to kind of keep everyone and bring everyone into the fold. Yeah. Okay. So listen, before I let you go, this is typically, you know, after the announcement of the running mate, when it's kind of like a reboot for a campaign, renewed call for additional fundraising. So what do we know so far? The campaign says it raised $26 million in 24 hours. You know, sometimes the numbers get dizzying to me, Ed, and I don't even really know what that means. Is that good?
It's pretty good. I mean, that's more than $1 million an hour in 24 hours after she was picked, and you know, that's money they desperately need too. The president has a huge advantage given that he's been fundraising for his reelection since essentially the moment he became president. There were a few months over the summer where they outraised the president and the Republican National Committee on a month-by-month basis, but the GOP still has the cash advantage. And while there will be outside groups that help both the president and Vice President Pence and Biden and Harris, the campaigns need as much of it as they can to pay for field operations, if they have to deploy staff or other personnel or equipment to different states. They're going to need it for legal fees, potentially. And a lot of it is going to be spent on advertising. People will see it on their television. People will see it here on their streaming device. They'll get it on their phone. They'll hear it on the radio. We hear that the Biden campaign especially is buying up time during NFL games later this fall, should they be played as scheduled. All of it designed to reach as many people as possible because they still understand that they've got to reach these people, motivate them to vote at a time when motivation and education about how to vote is going to be especially critical. And watch those Biden ads, because they have, much like the president's, they don't necessarily star Biden. They feature regular everyday Americans discussing the effects of the pandemic and why it is they feel compelled to vote for either side of the options here. And so it'll be hard to escape it going into the fall, given all the advertising they'll be doing across platforms.
That's really interesting, because I was wondering whether or not, you know, because of the pandemic, a campaign would just be cheaper because you just can't physically go to certain places. You can't hold a rally at a massive, in a massive building, and so you don't need to rent out that building and all the extra stuff. But I guess they're doubling down on advertising, which in campaigns before had kind of been dwindling because of social media.
Right. Right, and they got to double down on the advertising because they have to do it across so many more platforms. And let's be frank. For example, CBSN wasn't as popular 4 years ago, so they got to reach people through this medium, but they've also got to reach them on the regular CBS broadcast network. And you're right, fewer real estate costs, fewer travel costs, certainly, but they're gonna pump most of that money into digital outreach, which for them, at least over the summer, for the Biden team, has been working.
Really interesting stuff. Ed, thank you so much.
Take care.